Assalamu alaikum. You know, sometimes memories run into each other. Today I was reading a verse, and I said, I'll put that on my YouTube tonight. It had to do with my mom. And then tonight, I was speaking later on to a friend with 4 sons, and, off to school, busy, getting them out and going to her job. And I was thinking about how much easier it is when you're a Muslim, even though all moms have the same chores to do, working the house, the children, rushing around. And yet there's one big difference. So before I read you the verse of Quran that reminded me of my mom this morning, I'll tell you about this friend. She was stressed. I felt it. And I said, I want to tell you what my mom used to do so you can see the comparison. When my mom was very stressed of having 5 boys in a row, I remember my mom would raise her hands up like this, like a Muslim would, but she'd put them way up, and she would implore. Now I'm going to tell you exactly what she said. May Allah forgive me. But she would say, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, and all the saints in heaven, help me. And I was the oldest, so I had, the age where I had some reason, and I would say to her, Mom, why are you calling on all these other people? Why don't you just ask God? Because that was the only name I knew back then, and it made no sense to me how she would implore others. And it wasn't just Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, it was all the saints. Well, she did say, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, and all the saints in heaven, help me. But then it was other saints. I'll often remember the St. Christopher little statue that was stuck to the dashboard of the car. And she drove, not much, just once a week to the supermarket. But I would look at that little statue. It was so tiny. It was no bigger than my index finger. And it was white, plastic, and she would always say St. Christopher. It had something to do with protecting the car. And then she would say, St. Anthony, look around. Something lost can't be found. And I would always be perplexed at that as a small child, that I knew that you should only call on one, but I didn't understand, but I had this intrinsic feeling that there's only one that can help you. And I used to think about, they called him God. But then I would lie in my bed and look up and say, I don't know your name, but I know you're very powerful. And you don't hang on the wall. You're not on that cross with all that blood and thorns, crown of thorns, blood dripping into your eyes, and then the nails in your hands and feet. I just thought the entire idea was preposterous, ridiculous. So imagine my joy when I heard the word Allah for the first time. I was maybe in my mid-30s, because I actually took Shahada myself in my room with Allah when I was 38. But then when I went to Egypt, I was 40, and then I could do the paperwork. That's what you have to do when you live in Egypt. You have to go to Al-Azhar and all that. So that's the story of my mom calling on other powers. And then I'll tell you about another, it's a verse in the Quran. And it's always been an issue with me every time I read this chapter. Surat al-Mujadilah. And it's just one verse. It's a little bit long. It's verse number 8. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألم تر إلى الذين نهوا عن النجوى ثم يعودون لما نهوا يوعدون لما نهوا عنه ويتناجون بالإثم والعدوان ومعصية الرسول وإذا جاءوك حيوك بما لم يحيك به الله ويقولون في أنفسهم لولا يعذبهم الله بما نقول حسبهم جهنم يصلونها فبئس المصير. You see, it is quite a long verse, but the part in the middle is the part that I want to stress to you. So I'll read the first 2 lines and then I'll stop in the middle and tell you why this word is important. ألم تر إلى الذين نهوا عن النجوى ثم يعودون لما نهوا عنه ويتناجون بالإثم والعدوان ومعصية الرسول وإذا جاءوك حيوك. That's the word in the middle. حيوك. Try to say that. حيوك. Now, if I didn't have the mom that I had, I would not have paused at this. Why? Because it's called the tahiyya. You know, tahiyya means a greeting. And here, it's the verbal form, hayyauka. So let me translate about till we get to this, and then finish it, and then go back and tell the story of my mom. Allah says here, haven't you seen those people that were forbidden? Nuhu, it meant don't do it. Nahiya, don't do it. And a najwa, you know, the gossiping, blah, 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 foolish talk. And then they return to it. They return exactly to what they were forbidden to be doing. And then they would do something else wrong. يَتَنَاجَوْنَ بِالْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. They would sit and say bad things, sinful things about their enemies, or udwan. They would be doing it, ism wal udwan. They would be sinning and actually creating enemies and acting like something aggressive. Wa ma'asiyat rasul, and disobeying Prophet Muhammad. And then when they would greet you, and here it comes, hayyauka, they would greet you. Hayyauka means you. Bi ma lam yuhiyaka bihi Allah. They would greet you other than what Allah would greet you with. وَيَقُولُونَ فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ. And they would say within themselves, لَوْلَا يُعَذِّبُنَا اللَّهُ, if Allah wouldn't punish us, بِمَا نَقُولُ, by what we say, حَسْبُهُمْ جَهَنَّمْ. يَصْلَوْنَهَا, they will go to the fire and get burned there. فَبِئْسَ الْمَصِيرُ. Now this long verse, I'm specifically telling you about hayyauka. So, here's the memory. When I was young, and I mean very young, like 5, 6, 7, 8, when you're really observant and you pick up on everything, I always remember my mom answering the phone and saying, Hiyo, or she would wave to a neighbor at the door and say, Hiyo, Hiyo. And I was, as I told you, that really young age where you observe things, but you kind of don't understand. Until one time, my dad said to her, this day stuck in my mind. He said, Beatrice, that was her name. I told you, I don't like it when you keep saying Hiyo. This is his wife now. This is modern America. Both of them raised in the Boston area. Both of them approximately the same age, 3 years different, but they had a very different upbringing. My dad was super religious Catholic family, and my mom was in name only. So he said, I don't want you saying Hiyo anymore. You sound weird. You're supposed to say hi or hello. And at that age, I was so confused because I loved both mom and dad equally at that time. That was before I took on my dad fascination. And he was my big hero, you know, so I would always lean towards my dad. Because my mom was just always there, and she was housewife and always in a bad mood and yelling at us. And of course, my dad, I think I told you this story before, but this is very, very, in your formative years, this means something. My mom was always miserable. And my dad was so awesome. He'd wake up very early. My mom never got out of bed before we went to school, so I never saw her awake in the morning. But my dad would wake up early and pray at the bedside like this, literally like this, bowing his head, kneeling. Then he'd take a shower and get all decked out in his awesome suits and ties and looking very just handsome and energetic. And he was always smiling, always being in a good mood. And then we'd go down to breakfast and he'd be there, and you know, it was a normal life, I guess, but mom was not around. She wasn't available. And so he was, for us, everything. And then he'd either drive us to school or we'd take the bus, depending on our age. I think when we were younger, we'd take the bus. And then as we get older, he would drop us off. And so it was in my mind at that time that if dad is telling you he doesn't like you to say Hiyo, then don't say Hiyo. But I recall my mother never, and she was the one that would always have the last word, and she would always be like, difficult. My mom was difficult. And she didn't say a word. And I thought, so what's the mystery of this Hiyo thing? That was when I was really little. Then I got older and I really didn't care because I started to realize how different my parents' background was. And I opted for my dad's family only because we saw them more. And they were so, you know, all of them very religious. So I liked that, the nuns and visiting the nuns in the convent. But my mom's family, they kind of had, in my opinion, more of I don't want to say soul, because they didn't go to church. But there was something more cozy about them when you went to their house, which, of course, we didn't go every week. We went to my dad's much more often. So the Hiyo story came back when I was perhaps the age of 9, 10, 11, 12. We had a cowboy show on TV called The Lone Ranger. And I loved that show because he had a white horse and he always wore a mask. And he wore his white leather cowboy clothes. And these things stick in your mind so much because TV was great back then. It was not nasty. It was just all perfect. So in the beginning of every show of the Lone Ranger, he would come riding off the trail or off a mountain or a cliff or something, and he would be riding very quickly, and of course with the black mask and the white cowboy hat and the white cowboy clothes. And he would cause his horse to rise up. You know how horses can stand on their back legs? And he would rise up and he would say, Hiyo, Silver, away. I guess the horse's name was Silver. Looked white to me. So I heard the Hiyo at that time. And it stuck in my head. Hiyo. And I thought, I've heard that before. My mom used to say that. But my dad didn't want her to say that. So then when I became a Muslim and I found that word in the same context, it means to speak. And I thought to myself, could this be a language that is Arabic? And my mom's father came from Italy. And we don't know, they don't tell us where he came from because it's, I'm sorry, not my mom's father. My grandma's, my Nana, the Italian side's father, his name was Dominic. He came from Italy. And nobody would ever tell me where in Italy. They'd say they didn't know. Come on, what do you mean you don't know? I think it was Sicily. That's why that whole mafia thing that I often mention is in my family. So they didn't want to mention that. So this Hiyo business, my mom took it, of course, from her father and her mother, speaking that way. And my dad told her not to do it, not just because it didn't sound, I guess, sophisticated enough, or maybe he was Irish, so they always had this touch. My grandma would say, they're not like us, they're not like us. So I was like, I don't know, was it a trauma? Now that I look back on it, it certainly was, for many other reasons. But the Hiyo Silver, was he speaking an Indian dialect? Because he always had by his side his good friend Tonto. And Tonto was an Indian. So this show, I recommend, if you ever can Google it, just Google The Lone Ranger and get the old TV serials called The Lone Ranger. And you will see this. You'll see the Lone Ranger and his good friend Tonto, and you would see the horse. Here's something freaky. My godfather, who was my mom's younger brother, he was a lawyer, but he was a very strange guy. He used to drink a lot. And sometimes when my parents would go out, he'd come and stay with us for the night. And he had this joke that he would do with me because he knew I loved the Lone Ranger. And you could do this with kids in the past because we were very naive. And he would say, the Lone Ranger that you love so much? And I would say, yeah. And he'd say, I know him and I speak to him about you. And he knows how much you love him. And that's why he told me to tell you that every time he pushes his horse up on back legs and says, Hiyo, Silver, away, and he waves, he's waving at you. And I believed him. Oh my goodness. The older you get, the more you think about your youth. And you think about those family members who influenced you, rightly or wrongly, and the ones that you liked, and the ones that you were wanting to model yourself after. And perhaps there were reasons for all of this. So the other day I was contemplating my age, which the older you get, the more you do this. That's why I know you love these memory things, because it's pretty cool for me too. And you just think about the past and the way the past was and how different it is from now. Is it better or is it worse? I think it's a balance. I really feel there's a balance there. There's a lot that's much better, and then there's a lot that is worse. But memories are something very special because you probably block off half of your life. And the things that come back to you that you want to remember, it's almost like you choose. Do you remember only the good things and forget about the bad things? Or is it because it was mostly good things and not very many bad things? And then you think of the cultures and the clash of cultures. And what a role cultures play in the life of a person, be they Muslim or not. I remember my first grade teacher, I mention him all the time, Sheikh Ismail from Ghana. He had a saying, and he would often reiterate it to me. He would say, cultures keep people apart. Islam brings people together. We just say Salaamu Alaikum. We say it in the beginning, and we say it in the end. And we should say it all the time. Because it really is a better way of greeting, isn't it? Alhamdulillah, I'm a Muslim. Salaamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.